I found out my girlfriend was cheating on me in the condiments aisle. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. Literally, between the mayonnaise and the spicy mustard, where hope goes to die. I wasn't even supposed to be at that grocery store. I'd driven across town for a different brand of almond milk Dorothy liked, the one that tastes like guilt, she called it. She had this strange relationship with groceries, like they were her emotional proxies. I once caught her having a tower fight with a box of couscous because it refused to absorb anything meaningful. So I'm standing there, holding this cold jar of mayonnaise, staring into its off-white, existential void, when I see the label. She'd written on it with permanent marker, "Buy more. This one's too honest." I don't know what broke me. Maybe it was the word honest, or maybe it was the realization that I had been dating a woman who anthropomorphized condiments. Either way, my knees buckled. I sank to the floor, right there by the sandwich spreads, clutching the jar like it held answers. A teenager stocking soup asked if I was okay. I said, "I think my girlfriend is emotionally outsourcing her personality through dairy-based emulsions." He offered me a coupon. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. Not just with the relationship, but with reality itself. Something had been boiling just beneath the surface for months, and this mayonnaise jar had somehow blown the lid off. I didn't know it then, but I was about to uncover something bigger, stranger. A world where betrayal was scheduled. Where cheaters met in circles to compare notes and snacks. Where Dorothy, the woman I thought I'd marry, wasn't just lying to me. She was giving PowerPoint presentations about it. And so, with a jar of too honest mayonnaise in one hand and a receipt that felt like a prophecy in the other, I walked out of that grocery store and into the beginning of my unraveling. Or maybe, into the first real truth I'd seen in a long time. It started small. Like most terrible things do. Not with screaming or scandal, just slightly off rhythms. Mismatched socks in the laundry, even though she insisted on folding them in meditative silence. The toothpaste cap always missing, yet she claimed to suffer from closure fatigue. Dorothy had habits that didn't quite add up, but at the time, I framed them as quirks. Cute, maybe even charming. She was what people call spontaneous, which is just a polite way of saying chaotic with a skincare routine. Every Monday, she had a standing appointment that she never explained. She'd call it alignment hour. Sometimes she left the house dressed like a motivational speaker on ketamine. Bold blazers, fingerless gloves, and once, a belt made of measuring tape. I asked once where she went. She said to gather stories. I laughed. She didn't. Her phone was always on Do Not Disturb. When I glanced at it, accidentally on purpose, I'd see texts from names like Geraldine Sunshine, Coach Meatball, and Twizzler Daddy. Once, I asked who Twizzler Daddy was. She said, "Oh, that's just a safe space I'm cultivating." A safe space. Named Twizzler Daddy. She journaled every morning, but not in a normal way. She didn't write about dreams or intentions. She wrote scripts. Like actual dialogue. Me, "Do you want coffee?" Her, "Only if it's not black like your inability to communicate." Me, "Okay, cream and sugar?" Her, "Cream and closure. Please." It was eerie reading arguments we hadn't even had yet. Prophetic, really. She also started hiding things in the apartment. A file folder marked Confessions almond.My. A mason jar labeled Plan BS. Once, I opened a drawer in her desk and found a stack of anonymous letters, all addressed to whom I didn't commit. Each one read like a breakup note to people I'd never heard of. But the worst was the sock. One day I found a men's sock under the couch, not mine. Size 13. Neon green. Embroidered with the word stallion. I asked. She blinked, deadpan. "It's for inspiration." Inspiration. I was still operating under the assumption that we were in a functional relationship. I mean, we made soup together. We watched Scandinavian thrillers. We once built a blanket fort so elaborate it required a zoning permit. But love, I now realize, can camouflage itself as routine madness, especially when you're too tired to dig beneath the surface. And beneath Dorothy's surface was something I hadn't seen coming. A ritual, a pattern, and a circle of people who treated fidelity like a gluten allergy. But I wasn't there yet. Not until the night she left wearing a sequined blazer and said, "Don't wait up. We're talking about boundaries tonight." That was the last normal sentence I remember. Our acquaintance and the sweet life before this was like this. We met in a dog park. Neither of us owned a dog. She was sitting on a bench reading a book titled Emotional Arson: How to Burn Without Getting Caught. I was pretending to jog because I had recently downloaded an app that said I should. I stopped to tie my shoe, an act I rarely do with precision, and she looked up and said, "You look like someone who apologizes for sneezing." I said, "You look like someone who critiques therapy sessions she's not a part of." She smiled. It was instant. That spark, that absurd click, like two badly tuned pianos playing the same off-key note and calling it jazz. We started dating almost immediately. First dates turned into fifth dates without anyone noticing. By the third week, we were finishing each other's lies. She'd say, "I love the sea," and I'd say, "I've never drowned, but I respect those who try." It made no sense, and that made it perfect. Dorothy had this way of making chaos seem curated. She'd throw all the kitchen spices into a single meal and call it emotional flavor. She painted her bedroom walls according to her moods, literally. On Tuesday, it was eggplant. By Saturday, saffron rage. But she made me laugh. God, did she make me laugh? She'd write post-it notes with things like, "I forgive you for dreaming about your ex. Don't touch the tofu. It's having a hard week. If you die, I'm deleting your browser history, no questions asked." We did dumb things together, the kind of things couples in quirky romantic movies do before the plot turns. We once spent an entire weekend trying to teach a pigeon how to count to 4. We celebrated obscure holidays: International Waffle Day, Squirrel Appreciation Month, and one very sincere moment of silence for a broken umbrella named Kevin. We had traditions. On Fridays, we'd order the worst-rated takeout on Yelp and try to make it romantic. On Sundays, we'd write anonymous notes and hide them in library books. "You're doing great, unless you're not. In which case, try salsa dancing." There were nights where she'd rest her head on my chest and tell me she was afraid of becoming a parody of herself. I told her she was already a trilogy. She said, "You make me feel like a person." I said, "You make me feel like a character." She kissed me like it was a contract. And in those months, I never once doubted her. Why would I? The woman I loved was brilliant, strange, unpredictable, but never cruel. Or at least not obviously. But love is a magician. It distracts you with the doves and the glitter, while the real trick happens behind a curtain, quietly, systematically, until one day, you look down and realize your wallet's gone and the rabbit's wearing your watch. I didn't know it yet, but behind her soft kisses and themed Wednesdays, something was happening. A double life unfolding neatly, like origami made from divorce papers. And me? I was the emotional prop, the loving placeholder, the beta reader for her confessions. It began with the lasagna. Not a regular lasagna, a crowd-funded one. Dorothy said she was making it for a community potluck of radical truth-tellers. I asked if I could come. She laughed so hard she snorted oat milk through her nose and said, "You wouldn't survive the appetizers." I thought she meant that metaphorically. I did not yet understand she meant it spiritually, ethically, and legally. She spent the entire night chopping vegetables while listening to a playlist titled "Songs That Hurt Too Much to Hum." She sang along anyway. Then she carefully layered the pasta sheets like she was filing emotional lawsuits between marinara and regret. When I peeked into the kitchen, she hissed at me like a raccoon guarding a garbage treasure. I let her go. I always did. That was my job. William, the partner of unspecified boundaries. Then came the duck mask. One morning, I found it on our bed. Not latex, not cute. Paper mache. Homemade. With glitter around the beak and one tear painted under the left eye. It stared at me like it knew everything. I picked it up and found, taped inside, a tiny note. "It's your turn to listen." I asked Dorothy. She said it was for a group exercise about animal personas and infidelity narratives. I asked, "What group?" She said, "You don't know them." Then she kissed me with a level of tenderness reserved for trauma victims and people she planned to abandon. Still, I didn't press. That's the thing about trusting someone. You start ignoring the duck masks. Then, the tipping point. It was a Wednesday. She left with her usual cryptic farewell. "Tonight we're workshopping accountability. Don't microwave anything that screams." An hour later, I got a call from a woman named Marble. Yes, Marble. She said she'd found my number on the emergency contact list in something called the accountability roulette binder. I asked what that meant. She said, "I'm not supposed to talk to you. You're considered a narrative variable." Then she hung up. I stared at my phone for 10 full minutes. I Googled accountability roulette. The top result was a PDF pamphlet titled, "So you betrayed someone? Welcome." The second was a subreddit. Private. Invitation only. I applied under the username GravyGhost47. I lied and said I once emotionally cheated with a barista over the course of 2 years by ordering metaphorical lattes. I got accepted. What I found there was unholy. People were posting spreadsheets, timelines, color-coded graphs about victim fatigue and cheat equilibrium. One thread was titled, "How to Gaslight Without Getting Caught on Camera." Another simply read, "Dorothy's Wednesday recipes, lasagna plus confession crumble." That's when I saw it. A blurry group photo. 12 people, seated in a circle. In the middle, Dorothy, holding a dry erase board that read, Chapter 7, When Cheating Becomes Self-Care. I stared at the image. My mind did that thing where it refused to process what was clearly in front of it. I zoomed in until the pixels bled together. Still Dorothy, smiling, wearing the duck mask. The exposure wasn't a scream. It was a whimper inside a casserole. It was a woman I loved teaching others how to cheat better, how to frame it, brand it, and serve it with lasagna. And yet, I still didn't know the full truth. This was just the overture. The group had secrets within secrets, and one of them was about to explode. The real unraveling didn't come through shouting or sobbing or a dramatic car chase, though that would have been a welcome simplification. No, truth arrived like a drunk mime in church, clumsy, silent, and extremely uncomfortable to explain to others. It began with a PowerPoint presentation. Dorothy was unusually quiet that evening. She came home smelling like nutmeg and performance anxiety. I asked her how alignment hour had gone, and she muttered, "Tonight was brutal. We did timeline mapping and group forgiveness journaling." Someone cried into the hummus. Then she went to bed wearing a t-shirt that said, "Ask me about my boundaries," and nothing else. Curious and mildly panicking, I opened her laptop while she slept. I know, it's wrong. But morality has a funny way of shutting up when you're staring down a breadcrumb trail of lasagna and glitter. There it was, a folder titled, Cheater's Curriculum Spring Cohort. Inside were PDFs, voice memos, and slides. So many slides. Slide 1. Radical reframing. When cheating is just nonlinear loving. Slide 8. Communication tips for managing your primary while satisfying your side. Slide 14 had a pie chart titled, Distribution of Emotional Labor, Main versus Others. The main slice was comically small, like a decorative parsley leaf on a buffet of betrayal. Then a slide 22, the smoking gun. A group photo again. This time, everyone was holding signs like, Cheated and Still Centered. My affair, my truth. Infidelity as inner child work. Dorothy's sign read, I broke 2 hearts and grew 3. There was an Excel spreadsheet attached. It had names, dates, aliases. One column said affair name, another said time slot, and another, most chilling, said alibi used. My name was in it. William, Wednesdays, sound bath and reflection. My life had become an excuse. I was a cover story for group night. Then I saw the columns labeled overlap risks and double dips. That's where the absurdity evolved into full-blown, operatic madness. Apparently, 2 members, let's call them Kale and Brutus, discovered during a confession circle that they were both cheating with the same woman. They each described her body as feral yet affirming, and when the group facilitator, Juno, realized they were describing the same tattoo, a moth with a knife on the upper thigh, things spiraled. There was screaming. There was a vote. Someone threw a healing crystal shaped like a penis. In the meeting notes, Dorothy wrote, Session 11, Chaos broke containment. Kale sobbed into the beanbag. Brutus demanded exclusive rights to the affair partner. We held space for their tantrums. I reminded everyone that betrayal isn't zero-sum, it's a buffet. A consensual buffet. But it didn't stop there. Dorothy and a few others broke off and founded a new group, Cheaters Anonymous. Their motto? For those who strayed and stayed. They met weekly, secretly, on Thursday nights. Dorothy brought snacks and worksheets. One was called How to Have a One-Night Stand with Emotional Literacy. And the biggest detail? The last meeting featured a live performance called The Apology I'll Never Give. It was about me. I know because she uploaded the script. It began. I loved him like a diary I never planned to reread. That was when I knew. Every laugh, every kiss, every inside joke had been footnotes in a case study. I wasn't her boyfriend. I was a data point. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because the apartment smelled like elderflower and emotional deception. Dorothy had just gotten home from what she referred to as conflict integration night. She dropped her bag on the floor, kissed me on the forehead like I was a particularly brave hamster, and said, Don't wait up. I need to go unpack the silence. She left again 15 minutes later, wearing a t-shirt that said, Every body tells a story, and holding a mason jar filled with what she called clarity tea. I later found out it was just boxed wine and xanthan gum. By that point, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't suspicious. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. That came later. First, there was the ache. The quiet dread that turns your stomach into a complaint box nobody checks. So I followed her. Not in a cinematic, trench coat and fedora kind of way. No. I wore jogging pants, a baseball cap that said, Weekend Dad, and clutched a yoga mat to look casual. Like I was going to a really uncoordinated self-help retreat. She walked to a church basement. Of course, it was a church basement. Betrayal always prefers fluorescent lighting and folding chairs. I waited 10 minutes and crept in. There was a table with name tags and an affirmation board that read, Cheaters Anonymous, come clean or stay creative. I slipped into the back and hid behind a papier-mâché cactus. Yes, they had themed props. Every member wore a color-coded sticker. Red for current betrayer. Blue for betrayed but cheating now. Yellow for emotionally ambiguous. Dorothy wore a platinum glitter sticker, apparently reserved for facilitators. She stood in the middle, barefoot, clutching a laminated cheat wheel. Tonight, she said, we explore layered betrayals. When cheating isn't just about sex, it's about identity expansion. Then, she brought out him. His name was Declan. Of course it was Declan. That's not a name. It's an open relationship waiting to happen. He walked in wearing a silk robe and no sense of shame. His hair was wet, like he'd just been baptized in narcissism. Dorothy kissed him deeply, intimately, the way she kissed me when we rewatched The Notebook drunk on boxed Pinot and bad decisions. Declan has been my shadow work partner, she announced, for 7.5 months. The .5 was apparently significant. Someone clapped. Someone else wept softly into a reusable napkin. Then Dorothy looked at the group and said, I want to demonstrate true theater. William, my anchor, doesn't know I've been cheating. But tonight, I will perform the confession I'll never give him, to him, in absentia. She stood on a little rug. Our rug, the one we bought together in Portland because it felt like old secrets, and spoke into a seashell. A literal seashell. William, she said, you were so sturdy, so devoted, so time-specific. But I needed more. I needed spontaneous chaos. I needed Declan. He understands my duality, my fragmentation, my need to ruin a good thing slowly, like artisan cheese left out overnight. Declan chimed in. We role-play as trust and violation. I'm violation. Someone murmured, so brave. I stood there, behind the cactus, mouth open, hands shaking, but not with rage. With absurd recognition. This wasn't betrayal. This was performance betrayal. This was PowerPoint-infused, choreographed, polyemotional performance art betrayal. Dorothy closed the ceremony by handing Declan a mini certificate that said, "Congratulations, you've been a secret." They kissed, applauded themselves, and then she said, "Let's transition into group massage." I left. I walked home in silence, holding the yoga mat like it was the last relic of my sanity. I laid on the floor. Then I microwaved the leftover lasagna. It tasted like regret and oregano. That was the betrayal. Not just that she cheated. Not just that it was Declan, but that it had been processed, presented, packaged, and I had been left out of the narrative like a footnote no one reads. I wish I could say I burned the apartment down or ran off to Peru to find myself in a salt mine. But no, the consequences came slowly, like mildew on a once-loved shower curtain. Domestic, damp, impossible to fully clean. Let's begin with me, since I'm the collateral here. After I left the Cheaters Anonymous performance, or seance, or betrayal opera, whatever we're calling it, I walked home in a stupor. I didn't confront Dorothy. I didn't scream or throw things. I did what any emotionally stunted modern man would do. I started a podcast. It's called Footnote Boy. Tagline: the overlooked, the underloved, and the accidentally poly. I recorded 12 episodes, all in a whisper, from the closet where we used to keep our shared bathrobes and the emergency intimacy games. It got modest traction in Bulgaria and one email from a woman in Montana who said I sounded like a man who once cried in IKEA. I had. She was spot on. Now Dorothy. Dorothy never apologized. She workshopped her apology, but she never delivered it. She published a zine. Yes, a zine. Called Infidelity and the Feminine Wound, a memoir in tangents. In it, she described our relationship as a warm oatmeal phase and referred to Declan as her erotic saboteur. There was a photo of my back in there. Just my back. Captioned, "He carried the groceries. I carried the grief." She now co-facilitates Cheaters Anonymous chapters across 3 cities. Apparently, they've franchised. There's even merch. Mugs that say "shame-free" since session 3. And Declan? Oh, Declan. He ghosted her. 2 weeks after their radical reveal night, he met someone at a tantra retreat in Sedona and moved into a yurt. Allegedly, he's writing a book called The Ethical Betrayer. I pre-ordered it out of spite and curiosity. According to Dorothy's second zine, post-Declan, Rising from My Own Ruin, she still sees him in dreams. Naked, weeping, wearing a crown made of expired condoms. Then there's the support group itself, Cheaters Anonymous Fractured. Apparently, during Accountability Month, one member suggested creating a spreadsheet of all the people everyone had hurt and sending them gentle honesty packages in the mail. That splintered the group. A faction broke off and formed a countergroup called Radical Leavers, whose motto is, "Leave loudly, leave often." Someone filed a cease and desist. Emotions were lawyered. As for me, after the podcast, I started therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind where someone reads Rupi Kaur and asks how your inner child responds to ambiguity. And I'm okay now. Sort of. I'm dating again. Slowly. One woman asked if I wanted to co-architect a shared container of trust. I ran. But the lasagna I make now tastes like resolve. Sometimes, when I pass by that church basement, the one that still hosts Cheaters Anonymous every Thursday at 7, I catch myself slowing down. Not because I miss Dorothy. Not because I want closure. But because I'm curious if the papier-mâché cactus is still there. I think it is. That damn cactus outlived my relationship. What I've learned, in the quiet that follows emotional disaster, is that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it's dressed in self-awareness and irony. Sometimes it holds your hand and thanks you for your emotional bandwidth while sleeping with someone who writes poetry in lowercase and calls orgasms soul echoes. I don't hate her. I hated the silence. I hated being the background music to someone else's awakening. I hated being the control group in someone's experiment with radical selfhood. But now I know that love isn't always what you give. Sometimes it's what you don't let get rewritten. And if you're wondering, yes, I threw away the yoga mat, but I kept the lasagna recipe.